This is the story. This is what happened. All of this happened. I talked about in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, because I knew about this back then. So what happened is, this is the story. In April, this is the true story. In April 1997, Dr. Stephen Greer, who's a UFO researcher, he's making the rounds in DC. And Greer is trying to talk to anyone in DC in positions of power who are willing to listen to him about what he considered to be runaway black budget programs dealing with ET tech beyond the purview, beyond the control of the United States government. But Greer believed that they were rogue programs. And he actually had the code name of, I think, at least one of them. So he's going in, and because he's accompanied by astronaut Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14, and also a Navy commander named Willard Miller, that got him enough cachet to get a meeting with Admiral Thomas Wilson, who at the time was Deputy Head of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This is April 1997. So they get a meeting, and Wilson actually is not alone there. He's with his boss, who's General Pat Hughes, who was one step above him, and there was another admiral. I can't remember that admiral's name offhand. So they have this meeting, and Greer gives his presentation. Meeting ends, and Miller, Navy commander, stays behind and talks to Wilson for a little while, and they talk about UFOs. There's an interview with Greer and Miller from, I think, 2013, where they actually talk about this meeting in a limited way, but they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember this." And Wilson's like, "Yes, hold the next meeting. I want to talk to these guys." And he kept canceling the new meetings. It's a YouTube video, and you can hear them discussing this. But anyway, so Miller and Wilson talk about this after the fact. They're talking, and they talk about UFO cover-up. What Wilson said to Greer was that he would look into this, and he did. So for the next 2 months, he gets advice from different people in the Pentagon, including former Secretary of Defense William Perry, who just retired from that position. And he goes through a group known as OUSTAT, and within that called SAPOC, that Special Access Program Oversight Committee, SAPOC. And he finds out that within those Special Access Programs, these are black budget programs that have little to no oversight, that nested within one, and within that one, and then within that one, like, so within one, within another, he found what he believed he was looking for. And he actually makes a phone call to the program manager of this. It's a private contractor. It's probably Lockheed Martin. And he says, "You have a program that seems to deal with a subject that I need to have oversight over, and you are negligent because I'm not overseeing this." You know, Wilson was again Deputy Head of Intelligence for the Joint Chiefs, and he thought he had oversight. He was wrong. He didn't. So the program manager says, "I'll get back to you. Let me talk to my colleagues, and we'll see what we do." So he gets back to him. He says, "Well, we're not going to have a phone conversation, but you can meet with us." And Wilson flies out. Yes, I know Wilson has said he's never went out there. Well, actually, Wilson did not say that. Wilson said he never met with Eric Davis for the interview. But anyway, Wilson goes out, and he meets with them. They tell him, yes, we're reverse engineering an alien, or a craft that is not made by human hands, not by man, not of this world. And we've made painfully slow progress in understanding it. Wilson says, "Well, I want in." They're like, "No, you're not coming in." He says, "Well, you're wrong." They show him a list known as the Bigot list, BIGOT, derived from World War II. It doesn't mean bigotry. It means something totally different. And that's a list of who's in and who's out, or who's in. And it's roughly 500 people. And he notices they're all corporate contractors. Almost none of them are DOD people. And he says, "Well, I need in." And they're like, "No, you're not coming in." "Well, what are your criteria?" "Well, we don't have to tell you our criteria, except you're not in." "Well, I'm going to go complain." They said, "Be our guest, complain, see if we care." And they actually said, "The only reason we're meeting with you now is because we were nearly outed a few years ago during a Pentagon audit, and we had the auditor nearly exposed us, and we had to read him in, and we're dealing with you. We've actually tightened our security measures since then." And it's true, William Perry did a total reorg of the DOD back in 1993 or 94. So anyway, so Wilson goes back, and he does complain, and he's threatened with his career, and it pisses him off, but he's like, "What can I do?" So he was told, like, if you want to complain, you will take an early retirement. You'll probably lose a couple of stars along the way, and don't think about becoming head of DIA. So he played ball, he became head of DIA, and then 5 years later he retires. And this is what happens in 5 years. In 2002, Eric Davis is, so Mitchell was part of Greer's team, keep that in mind. So Edgar Mitchell knew about this. He had gotten feedback that Wilson went on his wild goose chase for 2 months. Wilson probably talked to Will Miller about this. That is my best guess. He might have talked to Mitchell about it as well. Mitchell reports back to his people. Who are his people? The NIDS people under Robert Bigelow. Mitchell was on the board. So was Putoff. So was Kit Green. So was Eric Davis. All of these people. They are, all of them. What is their mission? Their mission is they want to get to the center of the labyrinth. That's all they want to do. They have security clearances. They know, Kit Green's another one. They know a lot, but they don't know everything that they want to know. That's the fact. So they knew about this for 5 years through Mitchell. And in 2002, when Wilson retired from the DIA, goes into private industry. It might have even been before he got hired by ATK, which is where he got hired. Eric Davis is sent out to interview Wilson. And yes, I know that Wilson denied being out there, and I don't believe him at all. Davis goes and he hits a home run interview. He sits with Wilson. He writes 13 pages of notes that are typewritten, 13 pages. Wilson, Davis. They're paraphrased notes, but they're detailed, because that's how Davis is. He's a brilliant physicist. He's extremely detail-oriented.
I spoke to him.
He might have recorded it. He might have transcribed it just from notes. I don't know. So what does he do? He gives it to his colleagues in NIDS. He gives it to Green and Putoff and Mitchell and all those guys. In 2006, a long time ago, one of those people showed me those notes. Okay? I was shown 2 pages or possibly 3 pages, and I have never been able to figure out was it 2 or 3. I was shown part of the transcript by one of those individuals, and I will not and have not and will not give up his name, because he's asked me not to. If he dies, I'll give up his name. He's still alive. The point is, so yeah, it wasn't Mitchell, because Mitchell did die. However, I was shown the part of the transcript explicitly where it said, this stuff was not made by man, not by human hands, was not of this earth. And by the way, in a 2007 podcast I did with what was it called? Gene Steinberg's The Paracast. I actually was talking about this, and I didn't say that I had seen pages, by the way, because I didn't want to give that up either. But I actually I used the phrase, not made by man, not by human hands. I was referring explicitly to it. That's in a 2007 interview from July 1st, by the way. Someone can hunt that down. So anyway, I saw those pages. And, but you know, they stayed hidden for years. And I talked about it for a few years, and then I talked about it less and less. And I was like, I'd still always talked about it. In the end of 2018, the interview with Jimmy Church asked me what was the biggest story that I knew that I'd never really talked a lot about. And I brought this up. And at that point, I mentioned that I was shown pages of a document. What I didn't know at that time was that they were actually circulating among the smallest handful of people at that time, because Mitchell had died, I think in early 2017. And when he died, and I still want to be careful about how I describe this, but when he died, some of his papers were going to be thrown into a dumpster. That, believe it or not. And someone very close to Edgar Mitchell said, no, please let me take them. And the member of the family said, fine, take them. And he took them. And in those papers, among those papers, were these notes that Eric Davis had written up back in 2002. The notes that I had been shown two pages of back in 2006. Exact same thing. It leaked. Grant Cameron, researchers, saw it in November of 2018. I think I gave my interview with Jimmy Church in December of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. But I didn't know Grant had it. And then in April of 2019, someone sent them to me via a Proton mail account that they'd set up. They were on an IMGUR page, IMGUR, is that how you pronounce it? So it was just a bunch of JPEGs that were not searchable. And so you had like a very, very few people who had access to this. But I saw that link and I was like, oh my dear God, this is exactly what I was shown back in 06. So I knew it was the real deal. I knew it was the real deal. But then I thought, well, I don't want to leak it myself. Like, I didn't want to be that guy. And Grant didn't either. I talked to Grant about it. He's like, well, now you're in the box I'm in. What are you going to do? So my plan was, I was going to wait. I was going to wait a limited amount of time. And if no one else leaked them, I was just hoping someone else would leak them. I didn't want to be the one to do it. But I decided if no one else was going to leak them within, maybe by the summer, was what I was thinking, maybe late summer, I had decided I would do it. And I would just take the shitstorm that would happen as a result of that. But fortunately for me, I mean, I wasn't the one who leaked it. And I actually don't know, to this day, I don't know who that person was. But I saw in early June of 2019 on a limited email list that I was part of, that people were talking about that document. And at that moment I thought, I'm just gonna do this. So I wrote and put out a YouTube video in which I called this the UFO leak of the century, which I believe it is to this day. And that's when, you've got people, look, with respect to some individuals out there, I just don't think that they've really studied this. Edgar Mitchell talked about, by the way, so after, go back to 2006, after this person showed me those pages of that document, I read Stephen Greer's recent book, which it was recent at the time, called Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, in which he mentions this, and he mentioned Wilson by name. And I wrote back to my guy who had showed this to me, and I said, oh, it's Wilson. He says, yes, it's Wilson. So I thought, well, I'm going to go find Wilson myself. And this person said to me, do you think he's going to give this one up? He cannot and is not legally allowed to. And I knew this, but I thought, well, I'm just going to try, see what happens. So I found Wilson's email. I wrote to him, and it was the only time in my career that I actively misrepresented myself. I felt a little bad about it, but I thought, well, I'm just going to do it. So I didn't say I was a UFO researcher. I just said I was researching the U.S. Navy, and his career came up, and I was very intrigued, and I would like to talk with him. So fine. Sorry, Admiral Wilson. I have respect for Thomas Wilson to this day. I have nothing against this man. I understand he was put in a tough position. So anyway, he gave me his office phone number, and I called him. This is still late 06. And so he answers the phone. I could almost hear him easing into this big chair, like getting ready for a nice long interview, And I, right away, I said, well, I write about UFOs in the U.S. military, to be honest with you. So sorry about the ambush here. But there was a meeting that I know you were part of in April 97, and it had to do with ET Tech, and you were with Stephen Greer and Edgar Mitchell. He pretended to not remember this at first. But I said, look, sir, I've got this confirmed. I said, I spoke to Edgar Mitchell. I spoke to Stephen Greer's. Greer wouldn't talk to me back then. So he had some associate who said, yes, Greer was there, of course, obviously. Mitchell, when I asked Edgar Mitchell about this, I said, well, what did Wilson say he would do? Mitchell didn't want to talk to me because I wasn't in the crowd. Mitchell said, well, Wilson just said he would look into it. That's all he said he would do. But I knew it happened. And then this other scientist, who has gone unnamed, who gave me the very deep backstory that Wilson was denied access and so on. I mentioned to Wilson, I said, look, I have this on 3 sources that you absolutely had this meeting. And he said, oh yes, I vaguely remember it now. Yeah, I was a busy man. We were worried about weapons of mass destruction and all this other stuff. I didn't have time for UFO things. He said, the only reason I even agreed to meet with him is that someone of Dr. Mitchell's stature was interested in this. And I thought, well, why would a moonwalking astronaut be interested in UFOs? Well, okay. So anyway, I said, well, the whole thing was written about in Stephen Greer's book. He said, read to me what he said. So I read the passage, and in which Greer talks about the meeting, and then the follow-up in which Wilson's denied access by private contractors. And Wilson said, well, that part is true, but everything else is poppycock. And he got so angry, his voice got a bit high-pitched, and he ended the phone call. You know, I wasn't trying to be mean to Admiral Wilson, but anyway, so that was my interaction with him, and I will just say, look, it was very obvious that this upset him, and with all of these people, like I begged the scientist who showed me those pages way back in 06, in 2019, I begged him. I said, please let me use your name. And he was like, no. And none of them do. Davis won't go on the record. Davis has come like this close. If you really would listen to Davis's statements, he is. Davis has this gift for walking right up to the line, but not stepping over it. He goes right up there. I got a no comment from Hal Puthoff and Kit Green, both of which are hilarious. Not no comments. They're almost like apologies rather than no comments about this. Davis issued a similar no comment. All of these people cannot talk about. If any of them were to, they would definitely lose their security clearances. And the thing is, all of them are trying to get to the center. And this is the same for Wilson. I can't believe like how people can be so naive about this world. All right, when you retire from federal classified service and you go work for private industry, you don't lose your clearances. You get more clearances and they become better and deeper. And that's because all the action's in private industry. That's where it is. So do you think Wilson doesn't have security clearances? Of course he does. They're probably better than when he was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. All right? He must not ever, he can't ever cop to this. He can't. I mean, it would destroy his career and maybe more. So all of them are terrified. They're all terrified of breaking ranks. And, you know, it's like in the mafia. And actually one of these folks in this community said to me, it's like, you don't even need to sign NDAs at a certain point. All right, you just know you do not give up information or things will go bad for you. They just know, they don't need to be told. So that's the world. And, you know, it's one thing for a casual observer who doesn't really understand this world of security clearances and intelligence community and UFOs to have these questions. I understand that. But there are some experienced journalists out there. They should know better. And they seem to forget this as well. But anyway, when I talk to some of these folks behind the scenes, I will only say every one of them says, oh yes, I know that document's totally real. I know that absolutely happened. And they've known for years. And you're in a situation here. And so I'm out here standing, at times it feels like I'm standing alone on the Wilson document, the Eric Davis Wilson notes. There are some other folks out there who support them, but they're not very forthright about it. And most people just prefer to run away. One is a famous journalist who said to me privately, oh yeah, well, I've known about this for more than a decade as well. Thanks for going out there. I'm like, well, do you want to go out there? And they're like, no, I can't. It would damage me. So unfortunately, that's where, and the irony is that this is not even a formal government document. It's private notes written up by Davis. Davis gave an interview for the Basement Office. It's the New York Post series of interviews. And he very nearly, even at that moment, practically validated those notes. People should go back and listen to it. So, no, it's a fascinating story. And I do consider it the UFO leak of the century. You know, governments and military authorities around the world know that flying saucers exist and that they are from another planet. Apparently, they have absolute proof of both of these facts. Second, there were 6 flying discs already have crashed on this Earth. This is 1958. And were captured and were taken apart, he said, by militaries and scientists of the countries involved. He said under like extreme security to keep this absolutely secret. And he gave some information about where these discs had crashed, or at least the Brazilian Navy guys gave Fontes information, which he then relayed to Coral Lorenzen. One, so we're talking 1940s and 50s here. One supposedly crashed in the Sahara Desert, but was too destroyed to be of any use. He said 3 crashed in the United States, 2 of them in very good condition. The 5th one crashed somewhere in the British Isles, and then the last one, they said, came down in one of the Scandinavian countries, and those 2 were almost undamaged as well. Just continuing on with this, they went on and said these 6 discs all were, this is very confusing, either 32, 72, or 99 feet in diameter. Those are the only sizes he gave: 32 feet, 72 feet, 99 feet. And I think it was the Aztec crash that was said to be 99 feet in diameter. And so here he is in 1958 giving that same information. They also said, along with this point of crash retrievals, that dead alien bodies were found in all of them. They were described as little men. They were ranging in height from 32 inches to 46 inches, a little under 3 feet to a little under 4 feet. They were all dead. They were killed in the crash. The examination of the bodies showed they were definitely humanoid, but obviously not from this planet. That's according to what these men told Fontes. The ships were all saucer-shaped with a dome. They were all made of very light metal, which was assembled in segments that fitted in deep grooves and were pinned together around the base. He's writing this in 1958. This was, in fact, the claim of the, I think, the Kingman craft that came down in 1953. I believe it was Kingman. Kingman or Aztec, I think Kingman. But in any case, he said that you couldn't tell from the outer surface of the ships, but they would come apart. Some of the craft, they said, had portals made of some very exotic, unknown type of glass, and there were a lot of other unknown materials that were found inside the ships. So now I'll just take a little side travel here. I'll just say for the record, we can more or less corroborate, I would say, 5 out of the 6 cases that they're talking about. So I went through Ryan Wood's very excellent book on UFO crash retrievals called Magic, Eyes Only. It is unfortunately out of print. Would love to see that book back in print. I'm lucky I've got a copy. And it's very useful. He did, this is in the late 90s when he wrote it, a very comprehensive look of all of the crash retrieval cases that were discussed up to that point. Only the Sahara case doesn't seem to have an entry. Now, the American cases could be from any number of candidates, since there's more than 3 alleged crash retrievals in America from the 40s and 50s. You've got Cape Girardeau of 1941. You've got the Trinity crash, which was just recently written about by Jacques Vallée and Paola Harris. That's 1945. You've got Roswell, 1947. You've got the Aztec, New Mexico crash of 1948. You have the Del Rio, Texas case of 1950, and you've got Kingman, Arizona, 1953. Those are only the most significant ones. There are others that are also potentially important, but these 6, I think, are quite prominent. And you might ask, well, why then are the Brazilians only telling him about 3 American crashes, not 6 or more? I would say there's really no reason why you would expect these Brazilian officers to know about every single American UFO crash recovery. Why would they know? It's not their country. They're intelligence officers, but that does not mean that they're going to get full data on everything. They're, very likely scrambling to figure this out, just like other organizations are as well. Now, the alleged British recovery is a little more sketchy, but in Ryan Wood's book, he did have some corroborating information about this. And actually, I think he traced information about it to a potential inside leak by the famous Lord Mountbatten, who did have a very strong interest in UFOs and a lot of knowledge of it. The British case is believed to have occurred during the Second World War. That would make it earlier than Roswell, probably earlier than the Trinity case as well. Interesting. We don't have a lot of information about it, unfortunately. The Scandinavian case, in my view, could be one of 2 things. It could refer to the ghost rockets of 1946, in which we do know that the Swedish government did acquire some of the pieces of whatever it was that came down there. We do know that, and that comes from a Swedish declassified document. It could also refer, though, to an infamous case from 1952 in Spitsbergen, Norway. A lot of people believe that is a hoax. It could very well have been a hoax. However, that event was reported in several German publications at the time, and it is true that a number of people did think that this was possibly legit when it happened. And I wonder if these Brazilian officers suspected that it was the real deal as well. We don't really know. Again, we just have to remember, simply because these men had some information on the subject doesn't mean that like everything that they knew was accurate. We don't really know. All we know is what Fontes wrote to Cora Lorenzen in this particular letter. So that's the end of that. Let me move to the third point. I don't think there's anything else really that I have for point number 2. Let's just pull this back up. Point number 3, what these men said to him is that we examined the instruments and devices aboard these discs, and they also said we believe they move by some kind of extremely powerful electromagnetic field, and they gave a little bit of detail on that as well. And then number 4, well, I kind of mentioned this already. The ships were carefully dismantled and studied. What they did not understand, the men said, was how the fields were produced. Like what was the source of the tremendous amount of energy that would be released through these fields that allowed these craft to go. They didn't have any clues. They didn't really know where they got their power from and so forth. There was speculation that this was some kind of nuclear engine, but I don't think that these Brazilian officers, at least whatever they told Fontes, didn't really seem to indicate that they had a clear idea. Point number 5, the scientists believed that they could find a way that it would be possible to do this, but they didn't know yet how to convert energy. This part confused me a little bit because what they said, convert energy from a nuclear reactor directly into electric power. I always thought that's what nuclear power plants do exactly. And there was nuclear power by the late 50s, but maybe they're talking about something else here. I'm not really quite sure. Point number 6, there had been a number of attempts to shoot these objects down. They generally were not successful, and aircraft had been lost. Multiple aircraft had been lost in the attempt to do that. And, basically they were saying our militaries are just totally outclassed by these things. And in fact, there were attempts to use guided missiles to shoot these. That did not work either. These craft are way faster than even guided missiles. And so that's that. They also actually went on, they said, look, these things have the ability to paralyze our electronics, our electrical systems, our radar. They can interfere with our radio and television apparatuses, and they can short circuit our electric power plants, that type of thing. He goes on, point number 7, they haven't shown any interest in contacting us, at least up till now. The men said they're obviously preparing some kind of planet-wide, huge military operation. They were actually expressed concern that they were in danger from these aliens. Is there going to be some kind of war? What's this going to be? We don't know that they're hostile, but we don't like the way it looks, essentially, is the impression that they gave them. They said that there's international cooperation from militaries and governments around the world. They are being informed about the situation. There's an exchange of information through intelligence services, and top secret military conferences were being held every now and then or periodically to discuss any new developments going on. In fact, they said the Brazilian Navy receives monthly, this is 1958, monthly classified reports from the U.S. Navy and report back to the U.S. on any additional information. And they said there's similar contacts existing between our Army and our Air Force. And they said several other military organizations in other countries. So they actually said, like in Brazil, the only people who work, like the only people in the know are those intelligence officers in our military who actually work on this. There's a few high-ranking officers in the high command. There's their own National Security Council, a few scientists, and that's it. Basically, most people are in the dark, they said. Point number 9, this relates to the previous points. Very deep secrecy on UFOs. It's not only classified, they said, it is absolute top secret. Civilian authorities and also military officers in general do not have a need to know. They are not entitled to know. And they said even our president is not informed of the whole truth. That is the president of Brazil. Does not know the full story. Very interesting. I could believe that, as a matter of fact. Point number 10 is that they said all the experts, all the military experts, all the scientific people who were brought in, we all agree that the people, the public does not have a need to know about this. This would not be a good idea from their perspective. They think that knowledge is way too much of a shock. It would paralyze life in our society for years to come. And again, this is an interesting little quote that Fontes relayed to Coral Lorenzen. That they said, we think they're doing a reconnaissance of the planet. We expect maybe it will last another 10 years before something happens. It was almost like they thought there was going to be some kind of timetable before an open conflict were to occur. This at least was the impression they gave Fontes. Obviously, that did not happen. This conversation's in the late 50s, and 10 years, that's just the late 60s, and we certainly did not have an open, acknowledged conflict. But this is what they said to him. They estimated the probability of these objects being hostile at something like 90%. That was their take on it, as what they said to him. And then finally, again, these points kind of roll into each other, but this is how Fontes gave it to Coral Lorenzen, that to conceal the truth from the public, there was a carefully planned censorship and disinformation program that's been under operation for many years. The whole policy is to debunk, and debunk the whole subject using ridicule, that's useful, and anything else. And in fact, one thing that they said is that these guys, they've used all the tricks in the trade, that is hide evidence, and also threaten individuals when need be. The impression that they gave is that even some people may have been killed, or at least if they haven't been killed, that's not off the table. There's they said, we're not interested in the so-called inalienable rights of people. They said, right or wrong, we, the military, we're going to do our job, and no one is going to stop us. That was basically the content of what Fontes is telling Coral Lorenzen in this letter from February 27, 1958. So now, I mean, here's what we can ask. Why should we believe Dr. Oliver Fontes? Is he just, spinning a yarn here? Or, which I don't really think is the case. I mean, first of all, Fontes was a practicing physician. He had a lot of respect in his field and in the UFO field. I can tell you, like, having read a number of his letters and reports, and I'm going to show you part of one at the end of this here. The man was meticulous. He was very exact, very energetic, was chasing down many Brazilian UFO reports at the time, including the Ubatuba incident, of which we are still studying it to this day. So that's Fontes. I think, he certainly had the complete trust of the Lorenzens. And the fact is, in his entire life, he never gave any reason why his word was less than stellar, why we should not, take him at face value for what he has had to say. I personally think the man's earned the right to our trust on this matter. And besides, if it wasn't the Brazilian naval intelligence who told him this, and who gave him this information, where's this coming from? There's a lot of detail there. So I think Fontes was telling the truth. And then finally, he gave himself a very reasonable explanation as to why these men would have visited him. He had been to the Brazilian Navy Ministry earlier that day, which was their stated reason. So apparently he'd gotten their attention. Now, if we choose to believe Oliver Fontes, and I do choose to believe, I totally believe the truth of that letter, we could ask, why would these naval intelligence guys have spoken to him? Why? Well, the first obvious reason is that they wanted the fragments of the Ubatuba crash. That was clear. Failing that, they clearly went to plan B, which was that they wanted to win him over. They wanted to make him compliant with them. Doesn't seem like that succeeded, but that was their goal. So to do that, to get him on your side, you got to give something to get something. So they gave him this information. Was their information true? Now we're getting to the real nub of the matter. Well, we can't know for 100% certainty, but I will just say this. After 65 years, everything that he wrote that I just described to you struck me as incredibly plausible and actually is quite accurate. I think it describes the UFO situation of today pretty darn well. And what's remarkable is that this is from early 1958. Again, 65 years ago. Now, in the 1950s, there had already been, I should say, some talk about UFO crash retrieval and recovery. And this, of course, most famously was from a very well-known book by American writer Frank Scully that was published way back in 1950 called Behind the Saucers. And his book had discussed the Aztec UFO crash and the recovery of small alien bodies. So the claims had been out there for at least 8 years when, almost 8 years when Fontes wrote his letter. So you could say, well, maybe he's just working off of that. But as many people know, Scully's book was almost immediately subjected to a withering smear attack not long after it was published, with the result that nearly all UFO researchers just ran away from the idea of crash retrievals until the idea is revived in the 1970s. Although, again, what became obvious from my interview with Alan Levine and now from this letter is that at least the folks at APRO had reason to be open to the idea of crash retrievals, and this is, I suspect, one important reason why. The Lorenzans had a very high regard for Oliver Fontes, and so I think this letter would have had a strong impact on their thinking. And again, keep in mind, this is a long time ago. Fontes is talking in detail about, well, not detail, but he's giving some explicit facts about 6 UFO events. And in 1958, 6 crashes would definitely seem like a lot at the time. That's one thing. And he's talking about multiple small bodies having been acquired. He's talking about an intensive program to study all of this, all back in 1958. And in addition, you have a scenario that he's describing of ongoing confrontational and at times hostile encounters between the world's militaries and these other beings. And we should add some information about some of the technical aspects of the UFO craft themselves. Not a great deal, but enough to make it interesting. And you have an acknowledgement, or at least a statement by Fontes, that the cover-up of the UFO subject was essentially an international conspiracy. I think that's the right word we want to use here. So all of those reasons, I think, are enough to make us recognize that in the 1950s, you had, it wouldn't take a lot of imagination to kind of fill in the blanks with that reality about the nature of the UFO cover-up. It's one thing to say, as the Pentagon today says in their utterly banal manner, well, we don't know, but perhaps there's something out there and we are investigating it. We're going to make sure it's not a threat to blah, 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 blah. That's what they do. All right. That's one thing. It's a totally different scenario to recognize that craft have come down, they have been recovered, and that there is extreme intense secrecy on the entire matter.